I remember the moment when I thought I just couldn't go on. Sitting on the cold bathroom floor, surrounded by the silence of an empty house, the tears wouldn't stop streaming down my face. My thoughts were a storm I couldn't control, and all I could feel was the overwhelming sense that the world would be better off without me. I felt suffocated, trapped in a spiral of despair, and every breath was a painful effort. It was as if life itself was swallowing me whole. The guilt consumed me. How could I, a mother, a respected professional, have fallen so far? My children, Noah and Lily, depended on me, and I couldn't even get out of bed to be there for them. I felt like I was failing, not just as a mother, but as a person. In that moment, all I wanted was for the pain to stop, and the only thing I had left was fear. The fear that I no longer had the strength to keep fighting. That was the lowest point of my life, a pain that seemed endless. And yet, in that same moment, something inside me whispered that somehow I hadn't completely given up. But in that moment, I was lost.
I'm Rachel Harper. Today, I'm sharing a story that highlights the deep struggles many face behind closed doors. This story is based on real events, but some names and details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. If this story resonates with you, please consider sharing, liking, and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Now let's get into today's story.
My name is Emily. I'm 38 years old, and I teach technology to seniors in a small town in Wisconsin. I also serve on the local school board, something that keeps me connected to the community and my 2 teenage children, Noah and Lily. To anyone looking from the outside, my life probably seems pretty ordinary. A hard-working woman, involved with her family, living a seemingly balanced life. But there's one thing most people don't know about me: my battle with depression, something that's been a part of my life for years, even though I didn't always know how to name it. Depression entered my life quietly, almost unnoticed at first. The first major turning point was the death of my older brother, Michael. He was only 2 years older than me, and although we were never that close, his suicide 10 years ago hit me hard. At the time, I was busy caring for my young kids, and the pain I felt was buried beneath the demands of everyday life. But as time passed, I began to realize that something deeper was happening inside me. Each day felt harder than the last, and a constant sadness began to settle in. I would find myself staring out the window for hours, unable to find joy in the things that used to make me happy. The pressure of being a mom, a wife, and a professional started to feel overwhelming. A sense of emptiness took hold, and even though I tried to ignore it, I knew I was losing control. My brother's death seemed to have opened a wound that never fully healed. At first, it was hard to recognize what was happening. I'd wake up in the morning with a feeling of emptiness, like something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. It was a sadness that didn't seem to have a reason, a constant heaviness that turned even the smallest daily tasks into insurmountable challenges. I used to love my job. Teaching seniors how to use technology was one of my greatest sources of joy. Seeing their faces light up when they learned how to use a smartphone or connect with distant grandkids brought me so much fulfillment. But suddenly, those moments of joy started to disappear. The first few weeks were marked by a gradual loss of interest. What used to excite me now felt like just another obligation. My classes seemed to drag on, and I found myself growing more and more distant from my students. Conversations with my coworkers became superficial, and I started avoiding social activities, something I used to enjoy. When I got home, I would isolate myself. My children, Noah and Lily, quickly noticed the change. I no longer had the energy to play with them or help them with their homework. Family moments like watching a movie or cooking dinner together became rare. The scariest part was realizing that while I was physically present, my mind was always somewhere else. It was as if I was disconnected from the world around me. My thoughts were constantly clouded by worry and an inexplicable feeling that I was failing at everything. This led to a growing anxiety. Small decisions, like what to wear or what to make for breakfast felt overwhelming. Many times, I just couldn't get out of bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this feeling would ever go away. People around me were initially surprised and confused. My family, especially my husband, John, didn't know how to deal with it. He tried to cheer me up, suggesting outings and activities, but he couldn't understand why I simply couldn't participate. My friends started to pull away, not because they didn't care, but because I was avoiding them. I would reply to messages with short answers and rarely accepted invitations to go out. At work, my colleagues noticed my withdrawal, but didn't say much. It felt like everyone around me was living their lives normally, while I was sinking deeper into a sense of isolation and hopelessness. I tried to hide what was going on, masking it with a smile when I had to, but inside, the battle had already begun. The crises started to intensify about a year after I first noticed the signs of depression. At the beginning, there were just occasional days when I felt particularly unmotivated and sad. But over time, those days turned into weeks. I would wake up and simply couldn't summon the strength to face the day. The bed felt like both a refuge and a prison at the same time. There were days when just lifting my body and putting my feet on the floor felt like an impossible task, something I couldn't explain but also couldn't fight. One of the hardest moments happened over a weekend. Noah and Lily were excited about a small family trip we had planned to the local park. It was a simple outing, but they were filled with anticipation. That morning, however, I just couldn't get out of bed. The feeling of suffocation and despair was so overwhelming that everything around me felt crushing. John tried to encourage me, suggesting that a breath of fresh air might help, but I couldn't even open my eyes without feeling a heavy weight. It was as if my body was paralyzed, and the guilt of letting my kids down only made it all worse. That day, John had to take the kids alone. I stayed home, trapped in a cycle of negative thoughts and guilt. I felt useless, a mother incapable of taking care of her own children. The shame of being so disconnected from my own life consumed me, and those thoughts only sank me deeper into a state of paralysis. At the same time, I felt powerless. I knew something was deeply wrong, but I couldn't find the strength to ask for help. My social isolation also grew worse. There were weeks when I completely avoided friends, ignoring calls and coming up with excuses not to leave the house. I remember one close friend's birthday party, Sarah's, an event I used to look forward to every year. That year, though, the thought of being surrounded by people, smiling and pretending everything was fine, felt unbearable. I ended up canceling at the last minute, saying I had a terrible headache. It was a simple lie, but it brought me temporary relief. Work was also falling apart. I started missing more days and missing deadlines, something that had never happened before. I was always late, and the compliments I used to receive turned into quiet looks of concern. Some coworkers asked if I was okay, but I always brushed it off, saying it was just a phase. The truth was, I didn't know how to deal with it. Depression had taken over my life in a way I couldn't control. I tried at times to pretend everything was normal, but the effort left me even more exhausted. At the beginning of these crises, I didn't have the tools to handle the situation. On many days, I just let myself be swept away by the wave of negative thoughts, hoping that somehow it would pass on its own. Looking back, I can see I was on the verge of a breakdown, but at the time, all I could do was try to survive each day. The moment I realized I needed help came abruptly, after one of the worst crises I had ever faced. It was during a particularly tough night when I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor, crying for hours. My kids were at their grandmother's house, and John didn't know what to say or do anymore to help me. He was worried but also frustrated by my inability to pull myself out of it. In that moment, as I felt consumed by a pain that seemed endless, I began to think that maybe life would be easier without me. That thought, although vague and terrifying, triggered a warning inside me. I knew I had reached my limit. The next day, with great difficulty, I talked to John about what was going on. Admitting that I had thought about giving up on everything was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He was visibly shaken, but at the same time, relieved that I was finally acknowledging I needed help. He suggested I see a therapist immediately, and while I knew he was right, part of me resisted the idea. The resistance to getting treatment was strong. I was afraid of what others would think. I had always been seen as the strong woman, the teacher who took care of everyone, the present mother. Admitting that I was losing control and needed help felt like a failure, a weakness. On top of that, there was the stigma surrounding mental health. I grew up in an environment where emotional problems were seen as something you could fix with willpower and positive thinking. The idea of taking medication or relying on therapy scared me deeply. It took me a few weeks to muster up the courage to schedule my first appointment with a therapist, Dr. Catherine, a professional recommended by a close friend, Tom, who had gone through something similar. Just getting to that first session was a challenge in itself. With each mile I drove, I thought about turning around and pretending everything was fine. But something inside me knew that this was my only chance to climb out of the hole I was in. In that initial session, I told Dr. Catherine about my life, my family, and how things had gotten worse over the years. It was the first time I spoke out loud about Michael's death and how deeply it still affected me. She listened patiently, and for the first time, I felt like there was someone willing to help without judgment. In addition to therapy, Dr. Catherine suggested I see a psychiatrist to evaluate whether medication might be necessary. The idea of taking meds initially made me uncomfortable, but after a few weeks of reflection and conversations with John, I realized it might be the right path. I started on antidepressants, and while the first few days were tough due to side effects, I soon began to notice small changes. My anxiety eased, and that constant weight on my shoulders seemed to lift, even if just temporarily. Alongside treatment, my circle of friends and family became essential to my recovery process. After so much time isolating myself, I started opening up to a few close people. Sarah, the friend whose birthday I had missed, was one of the first to know. She welcomed me with understanding, without judgment, and that gave me the strength to keep going. Slowly, my kids and even my coworkers began to notice that I was trying to change. This was only the beginning of a long journey, but for the first time in years, I felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. As I delved deeper into treatment, I began to discover tools that helped me manage depression more effectively. At first, everything felt like a monumental effort, but over time, small changes in my daily routine started to make a significant difference. The first major lesson was accepting that there wasn't a quick fix or a magical solution. Dealing with depression would be an ongoing process, something I'd need to face one step at a time. Therapy with Dr. Catherine became a crucial pillar for my well-being. In our weekly sessions, I learned to identify destructive thought patterns and replace them with healthier ways of viewing life. She taught me the importance of staying present in the moment and not letting myself get consumed by future worries or past regrets. This was a turning point for me, as I had spent so much time reliving painful memories or anticipating worst-case scenarios. This mental training, called mindfulness, began to bring me my first real moments of relief. Beyond therapy, I realized I needed to create daily habits to help me maintain emotional balance. I started taking morning walks, something that initially felt impossible, but gradually became a peaceful part of my routine. I'd put on my headphones and listen to calming music, or simply take in the sounds of nature. Feeling the sun on my face and breathing in fresh air brought a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. Another strategy that made a huge difference was starting a journal. Every day I forced myself to write down, even if it was just a simple sentence, something I was grateful for. In the beginning it was hard because everything seemed negative, but over time I began to appreciate small moments. A smile from my kids, a quiet dinner with John, a kind message from Sarah. These daily entries started shifting my perspective, reminding me that not everything was lost. I also began attending a support group for people dealing with depression and anxiety. The environment was welcoming and free of judgment, allowing me to share my experiences openly. I met other women who, like me, struggled daily to find meaning and stability in their lives. One of them, Rachel, became a close friend. She was a little further along in her recovery and inspired me with her strength and determination. Seeing someone with a story so similar to mine rebuild her life gave me hope that I could too. In addition to these efforts, I began rediscovering small pleasures that depression had dulled. Cooking, which once brought me satisfaction, became a way for me to reconnect with my family. I relearned how to enjoy the company of my kids in the kitchen, teaching them how to make simple recipes. I also started reading again, something I had completely abandoned. Getting lost in the pages of a good book became a healthy escape, a way to calm my mind while reconnecting with something I loved. These moments of relief, though brief at first, had a profound impact on how I viewed depression. I realized that while there might not be a definitive cure, it was possible to find ways to ease the weight it carried. I still had bad days, but now I knew I could rely on these tools to help me get through them. A major source of support was the network of people around me. Once John understood my situation better, he started supporting me in a more compassionate way. He became my confidant, someone I could vent to without fear of judgment. Noah and Lily also noticed my improvement. Even though they didn't fully grasp what I was going through, they showed their support in subtle ways, like small acts of kindness or patience when I wasn't at my best. These practices and support systems weren't an immediate fix, but each of them gave me the sense that I was, finally, regaining control of my life. Little by little, depression stopped being the only voice in my head, and new perspectives began to emerge. I remember the day I felt victorious for the first time after such a long period of struggle. It was a Saturday morning, and, as usual, I was overwhelmed by the mental exhaustion that had been dominating my weekends. But that day, something shifted. I had promised Noah and Lily that we would go to the local park for a picnic. That promise had hung over me all week, and honestly, I was tempted to cancel, as I had so many times before. But that day, for the first time in a long time, I decided not to let the depression win. I got out of bed, even though every step felt heavy, and started preparing the picnic basket. It was a simple act, but for me, it was monumental. I was leaving the house, breaking the cycle of isolation and sadness that often trapped me. Packing fruits and sandwiches into the basket seemed like an ordinary task, but it meant so much more. It meant that little by little, I was starting to rejoin my family's life. When we arrived at the park, something magical happened. As I watched my kids run across the grass, tossing a ball back and forth, I felt something I hadn't felt in ages, a flicker of joy. It wasn't euphoria or an overwhelming happiness, but a soft sense of well-being, as if for a moment, the weight of depression had loosened its grip. I sat on the grass, watching Noah and Lily, and realized that this simple act of leaving the house was a victory. From that day on, I began to notice other small victories along my journey. One day, after months of avoiding any social activity, I accepted Sarah's invitation to grab coffee. It was a brief conversation, but being in a social setting again without feeling completely suffocated by anxiety was a sign that I was, somehow, moving forward. Another day, after a session with Dr. Catherine, I realized I had gone the entire morning without the self-sabotaging thoughts that used to constantly haunt me. These moments of progress, no matter how small, became fuel for my recovery. What struck me the most during this process was the realization that victories don't need to be grand to be meaningful. For someone battling depression, simply getting out of bed, interacting with the outside world, or finding joy in something that once seemed impossible is a huge accomplishment. These moments taught me to be kinder to myself, to recognize that progress isn't linear, and that tough days will still come. But now, I had something to hold on to. The knowledge that, even on my worst days, there was still a part of me that wanted to fight, that wanted to live. Each small step gave me the clarity that overcoming depression isn't a final goal, but rather a series of small battles won over time. And in those moments when the darkness gave way to small lights of hope, I felt that I was slowly reclaiming pieces of myself that had been taken by the illness. Today, when I look back, I see how far I've come, even though I know that battling depression is still part of my life. I've gone through deep crises, faced moments of darkness and isolation that felt insurmountable. But I've also found small victories and rediscovered bits of joy I thought were lost forever. I can't say that depression has gone away. It's still here, quieter now, sometimes silent, waiting to show up when I least expect it. However, I'm better equipped to handle it now. The tools I've developed throughout this journey allow me to face depression differently. I know there will be tough days, but I also know that I have resources, both internal and external, to get through those moments. Therapy remains a cornerstone of my care, as does the support of my family, especially John and the kids, who have learned to handle me with more patience and understanding. Medication, which I initially resisted, has been crucial in stabilizing my mood and giving me clarity during the foggiest times. I've realized that depression isn't something that simply gets resolved and goes away, but a condition that needs ongoing attention. What's changed is my relationship with it. I no longer feel like a helpless prisoner. Now, I see depression as a part of me, but not the whole of who I am. It may be present, but I'm more than that. I'm a mother, a teacher, a wife, and a friend. I'm someone who, despite the struggles, continues to live and find beauty in the small moments. If I could share a message with anyone going through the same battle, it would be this: don't be ashamed to ask for help. Depression loves to make us believe we're alone, that we're a burden, but that's not true. There's always someone willing to listen, to understand, to support, whether it's a friend, a family member, or a professional. Taking the first step to seek help might feel terrifying, but it's the bravest thing you can do for yourself. I'd also like to remind you that healing is not a straight path. There will be days when it feels like everything is falling apart again, but those days don't erase the progress you've already made. Don't underestimate the power of small victories. Sometimes just getting out of bed or stepping outside is a win, and those wins, no matter how small, add up and build a path of resilience. Above all, I want you to know that life can return to moments of light, even when the darkness feels endless. There's always the possibility of hope, of recovery, and of learning to live alongside depression without letting it rule everything. You are not alone in this fight, and even on the darkest days, it's possible to find the strength to keep going. Depression has taught me many things about myself, some painful, others surprising. The most important thing I've learned is that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. There were moments when I didn't think I could go on, when the pain felt unbearable and the emptiness irreversible. But I survived. I learned to value my own resilience, even when strength seemed to have left me. I've come to understand that being strong doesn't mean never falling, but having the courage to get back up after every fall. Depression also taught me the importance of being open to support, of recognizing that we don't have to face everything alone. Accepting help was one of the biggest challenges for me, but also the greatest liberation. Acknowledging that I needed therapy, medication, and the support of those around me wasn't a sign of weakness, but of courage. It's what allowed me to keep going. Another essential lesson I've learned is the importance of being present for the small moments of joy. I used to think happiness was something grand, a constant state of euphoria or contentment. But depression showed me that true joy is in the details, in the simple moments we often overlook. A hug from my kids, the smell of coffee in the morning, a sunny afternoon at the park. These moments, small as they may seem, are pieces of happiness we need to learn to cherish. For anyone fighting their own battle with depression, my greatest advice is to never stop seeking help. The journey can be long and hard, but you don't have to walk it alone. Therapy, support groups, friends, family. They can all be your safety net when you feel like you're about to fall. Don't be afraid to ask for that help, and don't be ashamed to admit you need it. Vulnerability is actually a huge show of strength. And most importantly, keep your heart open to the possibility that even on the darkest days, life can still offer moments of light. You may not see it right now, but bit by bit, those moments will come. And when they do, let yourself feel them, no matter how small they seem. Every smile, every step forward, every day you choose to keep going is a victory. Depression is still part of my life, but today, I'm the one who gets to decide how to face it. And you can find your way too. Don't give up on yourself, even in the hardest moments. The struggle is real, but so is hope. And over time, you'll discover that even in the midst of darkness, there's always a chance to start again. With all my gratitude, Emily.
Now that we've reached the end of Emily's inspiring story, her words remind us of the strength that can be found, even in the darkest moments. The journey through depression is challenging, but every small step toward healing is a significant victory. There's no shame in asking for help, and vulnerability, as Emily has shown us, is truly a sign of courage. If you related to this story or know someone going through tough times, don't hesitate to seek support. Share your experience or thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs. Together, we can create a space of support and understanding where no one feels alone in their struggle. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Let's keep this conversation going and remind each other that even on the darkest days, there is always hope for a new beginning. You are not alone.